Biden and the global reset. That's the focus of tonight's angle. When news broke of Pfizer's promising vaccine trials, you might have thought that normal was right around the corner. After all, the vaccine will be ready for distribution by the spring. And when HHS Secretary Alex Azar, he says there'll be enough doses for every American. Wow. But your idea of normal isn't what the global elites have in mind on the other side of this pandemic. Come on, you know they hated that old normal. They like a new normal. And they don't like that old normal where Americans enjoyed their freedoms and the freedoms we often take for granted, like the right to work, to run a business, to attend school, the right to travel, and so on. For the globalists, the impressive economic gains that we saw in Trump's first 3 years were something to fear, not to learn from. Because let's face it, if the America First agenda actually took root in France, so we had a France first agenda, then a Spain first agenda, and an Australia first agenda, the national sovereignty movement would expose these global elites for who they are, anti-democratic control freaks. Because for them, individual liberty must always be sacrificed for the greater global good. Thus, COVID, as horrible as it is, as tragic as it is, presents a challenge, yes, but also for them an opportunity for what they call the Great Reset. You know the line, never let a crisis go to waste, that was Rahm Emanuel? Well, with the coronavirus, that idea went global. And since last spring, powerful people began to use this pandemic as a way to try to force radical social and economic change across the continents. In other words, Americans under this new world will have, they'll have to sacrifice liberty and prosperity so that things are more fair and equitable in the rest of the world. Now, the concept of the Great Reset was discussed at the World Economic Forum back in June, where they discussed how to save the global economy from crisis.
Any recovery stimulus should have green conditions attached to it. Secondly, energy prices should reflect real costs. And building back better ought to be about closing the gaps that exist in inequality and social injustice rather than widening them.
Wait a second. Isn't Build Back Better Joe's campaign slogan? Well, your individual rights are always going to take a back seat to promoting the values of global health and harmony. The fact is, all the signs point to Joe Biden's team being fully on board with this cynical and sick subversion of American independence and sovereignty. Strategies for fighting COVID, just like strategies for fighting poverty or climate change, should all follow the same path, no deviation among nations. So, of course, Zeke Emanuel and Michael Osterholm, Biden's coronavirus task force members, they love lockdowns.
We could lock down for 4 to 6 weeks, and if we did that, we could drive the numbers down like they've done in Asia, like they did in New Zealand and Australia. And then we could really watch ourselves cruising into the vaccine availability in the first and second quarter of next year and bringing back the economy long before that.
Oh, okay. I love that. Cruising into the spring. These people think we're complete idiots. Lockdowns failed terribly, miserably in Europe. Huge economic calamities followed. But no big deal to the people like Osterholm and the elites in charge, because they're always going to have jobs. But for the millions of others, businesses will close, jobs will be lost, schools will remain closed, depression and suicide numbers will go up, plus other illnesses will be left untreated and undetected. But all for the greater good. The founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, makes this Great Reset sound completely non-threatening, though. He says the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect and reimagine and reset our world. Well, to accomplish this, Schwab laid out a couple of big goals. Fairer outcomes by coordination in tax, regulatory, trade, and fiscal policy. And it all may include changes to wealth taxes, the withdrawal of fossil fuel subsidies, and new rules governing intellectual property, trade, and competition. And transitioning, of course, from fossil fuels to green energy. Now, using policies to achieve fairer outcomes. Okay. Well, all of this includes the wealth taxes, banning drilling, mining, new trade rules, okay? So outsourcing to China, all of this, transitioning from fossil fuels, all the jobs in our country, to green energy. Does that sound familiar? It's basically Biden's agenda. When Biden said we're going to work with our allies, what he really means is he's going to let them have veto power over our trade initiatives, our patent and trademark laws, and our energy industry. And that's just a start. And what better time to do this than with the fear of COVID hanging over our heads? Bill Gates, the WHO, the World Economic Forum, Prince Charles, the IMF, big business, and big tech. They're all in big for the Great Reset. If it means you have to give up your individual rights for global health security, so be it. Remember, surveillance, tracking, it's all good for you.
Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because you don't want people moving around the world where you'll have some countries that won't have it under control.
You don't want people moving around the world. But he says this is not about tracking. Again, this is just for health security. It's all for your own good. Calling them certificates or immunity passports, it kind of makes them all sound reassuring, like a security blanket. But they may be a lot closer to becoming reality than you think. In early October, the Daily Mail reported that London Heathrow Airport is testing, quote, digital health passes, which can hold a certified COVID-19 test status or show that someone has been vaccinated in the future. And in this brave new world, you may not be able to, let's say, do much of anything without proof of vaccination. Think about it. Do you love, for instance, watching live music? I do. Well, Ticketmaster has been working on a framework for post-pandemic fan safety that uses smartphones to verify fans' vaccination status or whether they've been tested negative for the coronavirus within a 24 to 72-hour window. Now, again, just like Gates, all the reassurance comes. Ticketmaster says they're not going to make vaccines mandatory. But then why do it at all? The New York State Bar Association is also considering a campaign to lobby to make COVID-19 vaccines mandatory. They'll decide on Saturday if they really want to push for this. It's obvious, though, isn't it? There's going to be growing pressure across all of corporate America to force proof of vaccination status for movement, for everything. Just like no mask, no entry, no vaccination, no entry. No job, no school, no travel, no nothing. Democrat leaders across America are doing their part, too, in the Great Reset. Another day and another COVID restriction from New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. No more than 10 people in your home at a time during the Thanksgiving lead-up, starting this Friday. So who's going to tell Grandma Mary that she can't come to Thanksgiving dinner because you've already hit your limit? You can tell her. New York City is a shadow of its former self. Businesses closing, for lease signs everywhere. I say it's resetting to a state of ruin. And all over the country, we're seeing a tightening of mandates, mask mandates, even as 95% of the country, a couple of months ago we saw in that survey, say they already wear them. Plus, there are more limits on businesses and worse. Tonight, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot announced that she was once again issuing a shutdown advisory for her city.
This is serious life or death. We are sounding the alarm that we are at this inflection point where we have to step up even more than what we've already done.
Now, what has she already done? Except preside over economic decay and rampant violent crime. Again, she wasn't worried about the virus spreading when they were ripping down Christopher Columbus statues. Again, though, think reset. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is huddling with staff and advisors in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware this weekend, where he's working on his own reset goals, as he plans to tighten the screws on Americans with higher taxes, more restrictions, and Lord knows what else. He plans to open up the country, however, to mass influx of illegal aliens, refugees, guest and H-1B workers. They're going to have an open society, open door, come on in. The rest of us, not so much.